My next guest, Dr. Karlyn Borysenko, goes after the deep state 24/7. And I must say, she's always on the winning end. After earning an MBA and a PhD in psychology, which she specialized in industrial organizational psych, which probably is why she's actually so successful, because she really, it lives in their heads 24/7, rent-free. Karlyn set her sights on helping individuals and organizations to create more productive and fulfilling work experiences by combining organizational and positive psychology with mindfulness strategies. Karlyn founded Zen Workplace in 2012. She currently works and focuses on helping companies and their employees with engagement, team resilience, and also increasing productivity. Karlyn also became a commentator on the political scene when she was involved in the walk-away movement, still is. You can find her work at Dr. Karlyn, KARLYN.com, also ZenWorkplace.com. It's my honor to welcome back my friend, Dr. Karlyn Borysenko. Karlyn, welcome back to the Operation Freedom platform.
Thank you for having me, Dave, and I really appreciate that intro. I do tend to feed off of hate and anger a lot lately.
Well, it's interesting because many people, as you know from your background in psych, many people avoid confrontation. But there's a select few of us that actually thrive on it, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's something to be said about if you can evoke emotions and that type of, frankly, outrage in people, then you're doing something right.
So let's talk about something that you started speaking about in the very recent past, what we call Coca-Cola. Right?
Yes.
So let's just, I'll give you the headline and you take it from there. Coca-Cola confirms training employees to, quote, try to be less white, end quote. Mm-hmm. Now, Karlyn, you uncovered this, started speaking about it, got a lot of grief for it, but in fact, what you uncovered was exactly what they were doing, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what happened is one morning, someone from Coca-Cola emailed me saying that them and their colleagues had been asked to do an online training that frankly made them feel really uncomfortable. And they sent me these slides that basically showed this training that was based on Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, which is a book that I absolutely loathe and is so damaging and toxic I can't even begin. But essentially the slides said that if you are white, you are arrogant, you're not humble, you don't listen, and the big culminating slide literally just said, try to be less white. And this so disturbed the folks at Coca-Cola that saw it that they emailed me the slides, and then I put them out there on Twitter, and it went a little viral, Dave, I have to say.
Well, at first, Karlyn, didn't Coke say, "Oh, no, you got that wrong"? No, I mean, wasn't there some pushback where they were kind of like, "Well, no, not really. You've misinterpreted." Wasn't that their initial take on this?
Isn't that always their initial take on it? But listen, no, that's actually so. The slides went very, very viral. It got I think 27 million views the last time I looked, and so Coke was receiving a lot of outrage about this, and they first released a statement saying that this training was a part of their curriculum, but it was not the focus of their curriculum. And then a couple hours later, they released a different statement that said that this training had never curriculum. But the reality is that regardless of which statement you want to believe, the employees at Coca-Cola did have access to the training, and the ones that were in touch with me were under the impression that it was a required part of the curriculum. In fact, I've actually seen internal emails that do say that the training that they were charged with doing was required. And so, I actually think it's less important about whether or not this was, an official part of the program. It's more important that these trainings are being offered at all. And what actually ended up happening out of this is there was so much pushback that LinkedIn, which is the platform that was hosting the training, actually ended up taking it down entirely.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but didn't they actually have their trademark Coke logo on the slides?
They didn't have it on the slides, but where they did have it was on the platform. So LinkedIn Learning is a very popular training platform that many thousands of organizations out there use to give their employees access to online training across a variety of different subjects. So when an organization buys access to LinkedIn Learning, their logo will appear in the upper right-hand corner anytime someone is taking one of their trainings. So that is why it appeared, is because Coke had bought their employees access to this platform.
So when I looked at the slides, now tell me if I got this right. It's about the Try to Be Less White training program.
Yes.
And it said to be less white. Now tell me if I got this wrong, because you're the try to be less white is to be less oppressive, be less arrogant, be less certain, be less defensive, be less ignorant, be more humble, listen more, believe more, break with apathy, and break with white solidarity. Now, did I get that right?
You got it right.
Okay, Karlyn, riddle me this. How is that not racist?
Well, I suppose it depends on the definition of racism. And part of the issue with critical race theory is that it is actively changing the definition of racism. So people like you and I, Dave, we might look at something and say, if someone's saying that someone has these attributes purely based on the color of their skin, that sounds a little racist, regardless of what skin color you're pointing to, whether it be white, black, Latino, whatever. If you're saying that someone is arrogant and oppressive purely based on their skin color, that to me and you would seem racist. However, in the critical race theory ideology, what they teach is that racism equals power plus prejudice. And what they argue is that white people cannot be, you cannot be racist against white people ever, because white people hold all of the power.
So, Karlyn, if a company came out with a program of try to be less brown, try to be less Asian, try to be less Hispanic, try to be less black, justifiably the reaction would be just overwhelmingly negative, correct?
Yeah, well, of course. If this training had said try to be less black, Coca-Cola's headquarters would have gotten burned down. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that. We all know what would have happened in the protest that they would have experienced by doing a training like that. And so far as I'm concerned, this is absolutely no different. First of all, there is no research to back up these claims that Robin DiAngelo makes that all white people are oppressive and arrogant and don't listen. What she's talking about primarily are different work styles and different communication styles that she frankly does not like. And that's all it is at the end of the day. So no company would get away with doing a training that says be less black or be less Latino, and frankly, be less white should be no different.
So did you get any calls from Coke management?
I did not get any calls officially from Coke management. I did hear from several more Coke employees, including one that was a fairly senior employee, basically saying that Coke was trying to really cover their rear ends on this one. And the very senior employee told me that he was actually going to, well, I'm not actually sure if it was a he or she, but like that they were going to leave the company because of what they found in the training.
Well, frankly, why are there not Coke employees going to sue Coca-Cola for discrimination based on this program? Why are there not?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if you've been following the case of Jody Shaw from Smith College at all, but she's a white woman that basically pushed back on this type of thing happening at Smith College, and she was put on administrative leave by the college. She recently resigned her position, but I bring her up specifically because when she was pushing back on this type of ideology at Smith College, she actually went to lawyers and asked if she could sue for this specifically, and she was told that civil rights law does not apply to people who look like her.
I think she needs to talk to somebody else. She needs a legal second opinion, because to me, that's someone that just doesn't want to get involved.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly right. And thankfully, she actually has. So she actually is in the process of starting litigation with Smith College right now. But the reality is that it is like people think that it's easy to sue over issues like this. It really isn't, because it is very difficult to find lawyers that will actually help you. And then you need to go in front of a judge or a jury and convince them why people are being racist against white people, which is not something that people understand and experience with what's going on in our culture. It doesn't occur to them that this can actually happen. Now, I want to say that I don't think that white people are oppressed by any means, and I absolutely do think that there are conversations that we do need to have about race in this country. Mm-hmm. However, when you're doing trainings like this is not going to fix any of the race problems that we have in this country. You cannot fight racism by creating more racism.
So the question so who was it, the Human Resources Department that put this training course together? Do you know?
So it was actually a third party that had done an interview with Robin DiAngelo, and then they put the course together based on that interview. Now, what's really interesting about this case is it's so funny, Dave, to watch the wall come tumbling down right in front of you. Yeah. So this third party had put together this training based on an interview that they did with Robin DiAngelo. They put it on LinkedIn Learning. There was a big press release, I think, back in June or July that this training was on LinkedIn Learning. But as soon as it started making national headlines, Robin DiAngelo actually demanded that the third-party company remove the training from LinkedIn, and effectively, she denounced her own training.
Shocking. Not.
I personally think it's because she realized she wasn't getting royalties for it, because that's what Robin DiAngelo's in this for the money at the end of the day.
Well, so here's the thing, Karlyn. Big companies, little companies, they have legal departments, right?
They do have legal departments, okay. I would think.
So the question I have for Coke is, for this to appear on this training site that your employees were subjected to, when did the general counsel and legal department of Coke know about this? When did they know it? And what did they know about it? For example, if the legal department didn't know a thing about it, that's a big problem in and of itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's honestly not uncommon, though, for legal departments not to know about this type of training when it happens. Listen, I actually have a lot of empathy for Coke. Some people think I have more empathy than I should in this particular situation, but the reality is that at most organizations, how this type of thing occurs is you have someone in like a mid-level manager position, maybe has a diversity and inclusion role within the HR organization, so kind of like a small cog in like a larger system. They put these trainings together, and then it gets signed off on by the director of HR. Then it goes out to the employees, and they're asked to do it. But it's really not usually, and I don't know exactly how it works at Coke, but generally speaking, these training programs are not vetted by legal counsel every time they go into organizations, which is actually, it puts organizations at risk, because a lot of organizations are making monumental investments in this type of training. They have been ever since George Floyd's death, and there is going to be a backlash on it at some point. If for no other reason, then this type of training has never been proven to actually create more productive and fulfilling work experiences.
Well, some legal departments might use that as an excuse. You've got to put something out there. Just put it out there. Don't run it by us, because that way we can claim we didn't know this was out there, and we can always claim ignorance, right?
That's very, very true.
Dealing with large companies, and I have in the past, they want you to pass through their legal departments many times what color or what kind of paperclip you're going to use. So it's interesting that when it comes to these diversity training programs, that's something they wouldn't pass through their legal department. And it'll be very interesting to see, and hopefully this is not going to go away. Now, are you aware of any other companies using this training program as Coke did?
Well, yes, I am actually. Well, it has been pulled down from LinkedIn since then. But the reality is that any training that exists on LinkedIn Learning can be accessed by anyone at any company that uses LinkedIn Learning. And so there was actually a reporter at National File that went in and found that there were employees from places like Adidas, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Legos, all sorts of these big giant companies that were actively doing this training. Now, whether or not their employer assigned them to do the training or whether or not they just went in and did it on their own, we don't know the answer to that. But the fact of the matter is that I think that the biggest victory in this entire affair is that the training was pulled down from LinkedIn entirely, because even if Coke had removed it from their training program, that still would have made it accessible to thousands and thousands of people at different companies that were using LinkedIn Learning as a platform.
So, Karlyn, what do you see? You mentioned critical race theory, and many people have a hard time getting their head around. Okay, now what is critical? You explained it, and in the past, you explained it to me, and I actually wrote it down. It was so concise. Critical race theory is the belief that most important thing about a person is the color of their skin, and that we should treat people differently based on purely on their race without regard to the content of their character.
Exactly. Yes. Critical race theory is a fringe ideology that started in academia in the 1970s, and it's been around for a while, and it's actually been in organizations for at least 10 years. But it really picked up a lot of steam after George Floyd's death and is now, Dave, I can't even tell you, this type of training has infused itself into most major organizations out there at this point. There are very few who don't have it in it, and it's really dangerous because it forces what happens in this training when it's done not online, but maybe through a more active engagement, is they actually separate out white employees from all non-white employees, and they will actually force the white employees to admit that they are racist, apologize for their racist behavior. It's incredibly emotionally harmful to the people who have to go through this training, who are just trying to go in and do a good job every day, and all of a sudden they've got an HR person trying to force them to admit and take responsibility for their racism. And so it doesn't help organizations to be more successful. It doesn't help teams to be better. All it does is create more conflict. And again, I have to emphasize that there is absolutely no academic backing behind any of the ideas that exist in these types of training. It all comes from a fringe ideology that is not held up to peer review muster.
Folks, we're speaking with Dr. Karlyn Borysenko, Dr. Karlyn, KARLYN.com. Okay, Karlyn, put yourself in the position of some of our listeners who are scheduled to go into a meeting, just as you described, by the Human Resources Department at their place of employment, and where critical race theory is going to be presented. And if they're confronted with, you need to apologize, right, as you just described, how should they handle that?
Well, it's a sticky situation, because the reality is that if you push back or question this type of training, you are in very real danger of losing your job. So my best advice to all employees in organizations is, frankly, to be very proactive about this, to make sure your resume is cleaned up, make sure that you have constantly having feelers out there looking for new jobs, because if this type of training comes to your organization and you make the decision to push back on it in any way, even just to question it, then you really could be out of a job before you know it. So it is a very touchy situation. Most of the time when people ask me for advice, I don't like the answer that I give them, but the answer is just go along with it, nod and smile, do what you need to do if you want to keep your job, because that's just the reality that we're in. And I do really empathize with people that are put in this position. I mean, what people need to know is that organizations will do anything that they think that they need to do in order to cover their backside with the public, and sometimes that involves not doing very good things to their employees. So you have to be the best judge of the type of organization you want to work for, and always know that there are other options out there. It is not impossible, especially in this age where working from home is becoming so much more popular. It is not impossible to get another job, but you just have to be prepared and be smart about the situation.
You know, when it comes to issues, being an old guy, I see a pendulum swinging, right? So if we see the pendulum now swinging way, if you will, to the left as it relates to critical race theory, what's going to start to bring that pendulum back, Karlyn? Because the pendulum maybe sometimes doesn't come back as quickly as some people would hope on a particular issue, but the pendulum always seems to come back.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things going on right now that allow us to fight back. I think number one is there are a number of states working on banning critical race theory at a state level. Dave, I'm actually working right now in New Hampshire. There is a bill in front of the New Hampshire House that would forbid state money from being spent on this type of training in state agencies or state contractors, and we're working as hard as we can to get it passed. Unfortunately, our Rhino governor, Chris Sununu, is taking his talking points from the Democrats on this one, which is a little bit of an interesting development that we just found out the other day. So that might be a roadblock for us. But the reality is that many other states are working on passing this. I've heard of bills in Iowa, West Virginia. I believe Kansas is thinking about it, Texas, Florida. I haven't heard anything out of Michigan yet, but you never know. But that is one thing that people can do, is advocate for this to be banned on a state level. Since Joe Biden rescinded Donald Trump's executive order on day one in office that banned it on a federal level. But the next thing people need to do is really make sure they understand this ideology and understand what is going on, and just push back in small ways. Have conversations with your friends. Have conversations with your colleagues whom you trust. Make sure that you're explaining to people what this ideology is, because the fact of the matter is that a lot of people still don't understand it. They believe that this ideology is what makes people good people, is what prevents racism, is what is fighting back against racism, and that's simply not the truth. So the more people who are understanding it and pushing back, the better. But if you can fight it on the state level, that's where you want to go.
And what sources would you recommend for folks go to? Is there something on the internet or some book that you would recommend for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want a crash course in all things critical theory, then you want to pick up a book called Cynical Theories by James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. James Lindsay, both of them were involved in the grievance studies hoax, where they basically submitted fake papers to academic journals to prove they could get published. But James Lindsay also has a website called New Discourses. It's newdiscourses.com, where he really breaks down a lot of this ideology. Helen Pluckrose has an organization called Counterweight, in which she's helping individuals to fight back against this type of training in their workplace and providing them resources to do that. And I'm working on some things as well, Dave. They're just not quite ready yet. So a lot of us are really making moves to try to help average, everyday people to fight back against this absurd ideology.